All right, team. Here is a presentation that you missed, or maybe you just want to review some of the ideas. All right. This presentation is called American Indians Representations and Realities. It does a little more than that, as I hope to lay the foundation for a film that we're going to watch. Okay. This picture is maybe a little complicated, and I made it so as to help map what the next 2 weeks are going to look like as we are talking about American Indians, their representations, and their realities. Okay. So today's class, this is the presentation where I put ideas and concepts. You can see it's one of these little balls. All right. And we are going to be juggling three different balls here. All right. There's the ideas and the concepts. There's the film that we'll start today and finish next time. And then there's the homework that you will start for homework this time. And you'll also do for homework next time. So it won't be due next class, it will be due after that. And that is one, because we're gearing for next week a discussion that looks at relationships among these balls, all right? These ideas, the film, and the Donovan reading. But also, it's pretty lengthy, and it's a challenging read. This should be hard. I should note that on Schoology there are resources such as an audio. Do not just listen to the audio. Make sure you're following along. There's you can get easily confused if you're just listening without following along because the author will from time to time go into a quote or something like that, and they might not lead very clearly with that, right? They might rely on punctuation and other markers to signal that the quote is coming rather than according to such and such an author, right? Which could help you figure out, oh, hey, this is a quote right now. But you might be listening and you might be confused. Is this the author's voice? Is this a quote? Whose voice is this? Anyway, I'm not going to belabor that, but do make sure you're reading along as you also listen if you choose to listen. Also, annotate. All right. I'm not going to tell you how to annotate, but I will tell you some of the questions and concepts and ideas that we're looking at. And you should be able to, in this discussion that we're having, access your text um, and find things, right? So that's why these annotations are so helpful, right? It's not for memorizing it, but it's for flagging it when you need it later on. Okay, enough of that. But anyway, we're dealing with three balls here. So for this one, let's just think about the ideas and the concepts. Another thing that this presentation accomplishes is it lays sort of a foundation for, again, the film that we're going to be watching. Actually, let's not look at that. I think I'm going to revise that slide. I think as the questions might change a little bit. Okay, an opening note on nomenclature. Okay, and that's nomenclature essentially means the words that we choose to use. All right, and when we're talking about people, we do have to consider the words we use. All right, and you're discovering already that I'm referring to the indigenous peoples of America as American Indian or perhaps even Indian if the context clues around my discussion, you know, kind of make it clear I'm talking about Americans, Indians, right? So I generally use this word, not exclusively. This statement comes from the American Museum for, or the Museum for the American Indian that's in Washington, D.C. It's a Smithsonian institution, and it actually has a statement on which terminology to use. And I'll give you a moment where you can pause this and read it if you like. In short, it's always good to refer to American Indians by their nation. For instance, are they Lakota, right? Are they Cree? Um, there's, of course, another designation that's broader that's used to identify these indigenous peoples of America more broadly, right? So, again, here's the statement on that. Um, okay, we're going to go into our first concept, and this is a concept that I may encourage you to consider both as we watch the film and as you read the um, homework, Denevin. All right, so here we have Edic and Emic. Edic, here are some examples: Navajo, Eskimo, Sioux, Michiganian. All right, these are all Edic terms. Here are the emic counterparts, and we'll see if you can kind of figure out what these differences are. Diné, Inuit. Sioux would be Lakota. Michiganian would be Michigander. Excuse me. All right. Okay. Um, well, what are the differences? This is an anthropological concept, so we're sort of using a lens from anthropology to interrogate history, which I find enormously important. Edic is an outsider perspective. Emic is the insider perspective. The Dine people, this is how they identify themselves. We are Dine. We are Inuit. We are Lakota. Huh. I am a Michigander. I am not a Michiganian. Someone who might not know might call people from Michigan Michiganians, all right? That's outsider designations, insider designations, all right? This concept is enormously important. It's not just for names of people, however, it can be symbols and images. Here we have a piece of art that is made of an American Indian that is certainly not created by an American Indian. Okay? This is decidedly Edic. All right? It comes from an outside. Someone else did it. Here we have a self portrait by a popular modern Cree artist by the name of T.C. Cannon. All right? This is Emic because it's a self portrait of himself. And he is from the Cree Nation. All right. So again, Edic, Emic. I kind of remember it by the M in Emic, excuse me, Edic, Emic. By the M meaning me is what I say about myself, right? Emic, me. All right. Keep moving. Um, these Edic images are all over the place. Okay. And oftentimes really misconstrued. This notion, this outsider notion that American Indians are somehow at one with nature, right? We haven't really explored this idea, but certainly early American Indians overhunting of megafauna certainly is a contributing factor, if not an overriding factor, for the death of megafauna. Climate change, certainly a component, but also human agents as well. So they are not necessarily at one with nature, but in many ways live unsustainably, right? In many cases, all right? Um, that sort of notion that you have this magical control over nature. All right, you have it with Nita as well. And you're like, Nita is an Indian? Yeah. Nita is actually the Choctaw word for bear. Okay. And you can see by her title, The Untamed, you again have these really damaging outsider um, representations of sort of the American Indian as savage, really. Okay. Here's one. Is this Edic or Emic? The Fighting Whiteys. Everything's gonna be all white. If I told you this was Emic, probably have a huge issue on our hands, right? Um, Alas, this is an Edic image, and I'm not gonna maybe go too much into this, but this is North Colorado College or University, rather. In the early 2000s, had an intramural basketball team that was made up of a number of American Indians as well as other people of color. And as sort of a subversive move, sort of with commentary about the exploitation of Indians as mascots, decided to make their mascot the Fighting Whiteys. There's actually a local school to the university or the college, Eaton High School, and they called themselves the Fighting Reds. So actually, initially they were called the Fighting Whites, but I think the story was misreported and they said Fighting Whiteys, but the team liked Whiteys more than Whites, so they kind of stuck with it. All right. Intramural college sports is it's another animal, and it's amazing, by the way. All right. Um, and yeah, there was at least at one time there might even still be merch that you can buy with respect to this and donations. I think they made donations to some funds that I believe sent underrepresented minorities to college because they did pretty well with that merch. I mean, it's pretty cool. All right, let's keep moving. That was a little bit of a rabbit trail, but in my mind, sort of a beautiful edict example. All right, let's keep moving. Histories can be edict or emic. All right, here are some emic ones. An indigenous people's history of the United States, and this is written by a woman who is an indigenous person. All right, it's not a white person writing an indigenous people's history of the United States. And maybe the notion of that sounds absurd, but it's actually quite common. All right, here's a gay history written by a gay man. Here is a history of Latin Americans in the United States, written by a Mexican American. Okay, and then you have the Black AF history, written by a black gentleman from the United States, of course. All right, so these are emic histories. So just getting a sense of what this concept means, okay? It's insider and outsider, right? Emic, edic. All right, going back to nomenclature for a second, I mentioned ideas around Native American or American Indian, what to use, excuse me. There's another word that I would say, and I think in the former example, there, the individual has some options of the terms that they use, with the guiding principle of respect, right? In this case, I would probably veer from the word tribe, all right? Tribe is still a word that's used in anthropology, though I would say less so, as sort of a people group that shares cultural and oftentimes linguistic similarities. I would suggest nation being a better word than tribe. It kind of, and there's a couple reasons. One, tribe is a term that is used, it's sort of an archaic term that these social evolutionary proponents put forth as how a people goes from savagery to state. All right. And this is mid 19th century. This is in the context of biological evolution. Some individuals took that concept and said, well, maybe not just humans are evolving, but maybe we can apply that idea to societies. And maybe there's this idea of this raw animalistic society, and then over time, and it can develop and change into a sophisticated state. All right. So this is what tribe comes from, and it's the second tier. You have band to tribe to chiefdom to state. And it evokes this idea of lack of civilization and savagery. All right. So in that way, you don't really want to use it. The other reason is nation suggests this idea of political autonomy, self determination. So it's nice to use that term instead. Okay, let's keep moving. All right, talking about our film real quick, and again, we're also going to apply sort of a concept here that the film talks about, but the example of white settlers coming to the Americas is an example of settler colonialism. There's all kinds of different versions of colonialism, right? Rather than settling, you might set up trade posts and markets. But there's a variety of different kinds of colonialisms. Settler colonialism, with the word settler, it almost sounds kind of safe and pleasant. But indeed, settler colonialism is the most violent form of colonialism because people are not just coming to trade and leave or set up a post, they're coming to displace the peoples that are there and settle those lands. All right. So there's a couple different ways in which the white people that came over from Europe accomplished this in the Americas. And it is through Indian wars, which are more prominent prior to 1900, and then Indian assimilation, which is more prominent now in the 20th century and afterwards. That's not to say instances of assimilation didn't happen here, they did. It's not to say that there wasn't armed conflicts in the 20th century with American Indians either, because there were, okay? So these are sort of just general. So you have like a little dotted line there, circa 1900. Okay, the film is going to talk about a couple events, so I just thought I'd just throw them on to give a time to them. One is the Battle of Little Bighorn. This actually is a defeat for the American military at the hands of Sitting Bull and Crazy Horse. All right, some names that may sound familiar to you. And that's 1876. The next one is in 1890, the Battle of Wounded Knee. This is by historians more often called the massacre at Wounded Knee rather than the Battle of Wounded Knee, as the army came into a camp and slaughtered between 350 and 375 Lakota men, women, and children. Okay. But there is a mention of Wounded Knee in the film, as well as the Pine Ridge Reservation. Pine Ridge is a reservation in South Dakota that these are descendants of the people of Wounded Knee. And that's the area that it took place. Assimilation, a couple of examples you're going to see are the forceful removal of Indians from their territories onto reservations, as well as boarding schools. All right. These are some other tactics that are used. And on this point, oops, I don't know, I have Wounded Knee still there. And on this point, it's important to define what genocide means. The film will talk about genocide. This is an example of genocide, and I'm going to show you why. This is post World War II, the United Nations came up with a definition of genocide which is the accepted definition today. And there are five criteria. Okay. So, genocide means any of the following acts committed with intent to destroy in whole or in part a national, ethnical, we don't say ethnical anymore, right? Ethnic, racial, or religious group. Okay. So, if any of these five things are present, according to the United Nations definition, this is a genocide. All right. It's not that you need all five or a majority of the five, it's any of the five. So, what are these five? Killing members of the group. That's probably the one that we're most familiar with. Causing serious bodily or mental harm to members of the group. Deliberately inflicting on the group conditions of life calculated to bring about its physical destruction in whole or in part. Imposing measures to, or excuse me, intended to prevent births within a group. Forcibly transferring children of the group to another group. All right, these are the 5 points of genocide. So, again, as we watch the film, um, this one's going to be obvious, but, some of these that are less obvious, um, maybe see if you can find some examples of that. And I think you can. All right. So, in sum here, yeah, I think this is our last slide. In sum here, we're watching this film. We are going to be balancing concepts and ideas from this little presentation here, and see if we can find these concepts and ideas in the film, and maybe even in the homework as well. Okay. And then try to draw some comparisons. Okay. So, but first things first, let's understand again these concepts and ideas and what we should look for in the film. All right. This is what you should look for in the film: examples of Edic and emic representations. All right. This film is called Real Engine. All right. So, right, you can see sort of the play on the words here. Rather than real, REAL, it's more like a film reel, right? An engine is sort of a edict. Well, Indian is sort of an edict word anyway, but it's sort of a pronunciation of the word Indian that you often find in these old films, right? Like a cowboy saying engine or something like that. Okay. So, let's look for examples of Edic and emic representations. Something to consider. What's the relationship between how a people is characterized, and again, these representations, that's how they're characterized, and how a people is treated? I want you to think about that. Words matter. Characterizations of a certain people group can lead to different behaviors and actions. So I want you to try to fit that together, make that like disconnect, try to bring it together. Examples of genocidal actions. I gave you the 5 point, um, the 5 point model or definition of genocide according to the United Nations. Can you find those 5 points in the film, or which ones can you find? Finally, and this one is really important. It's easy to focus, especially in a film like this, on the exploitation of the American Indian people, the problems. This is not, these are not punching bags, all right? These are real people with real autonomy and self determination who challenge the authorities or respond in creative and unique ways, and resist in creative and unique ways. So I want you to, in this film, think about different ways in which you're seeing American Indians respond to this exploitation in ways that show their own autonomy, all right? Resistance, and really humanity, right? Okay, that is essential. Okay, so that's what we're working with, and I thank you.